This police canine dog exposes a dark government plot beneath the volcano. When a sudden volcanic eruption traps a group of scientists, a highly trained police canine and his handler are sent on a life or death rescue mission. As the team pushes through treacherous terrain, they uncover a hidden underground government facility and shocking evidence of weaponized eruptions. With time running out and lava closing in, they must confront a dangerous conspiracy that threatens the entire world. Will they escape the volcano's fury, or will they become the government's next victims? The briefing room was filled with tension as Sergeant Rachel Dawson stood at the front, her eyes scanning the faces of her team. The mission ahead was unlike any she had faced before. A team of scientists, stranded on a volcano after a sudden eruption, needed to be rescued. But there was more to it. Rachel could feel it. Something wasn't right. The screen behind her displayed a map of the region, with a flashing red marking the volcano. "The eruption's unexpected," Rachel said, her voice steady, "but we've been trained for this kind of challenge." She turned to the team, her canine partner, Jax, sitting at attention beside her. "We've got one job. We get the scientists, we get out. No second chances." Officer Harris, one of her team members, raised an eyebrow. "Aren't we cutting it close? The volcano's still active, and we don't even know the full scope of the eruption." "This is dangerous." Rachel nodded. "I know, but we don't have a choice. The lives of those scientists depend on us. We're their last hope." The team exchanged looks, the weight of the mission settling in. Rachel could feel the doubt in the air, but there was no time for it. They had to move. Moments later, the team, along with a group of scientists, boarded the helicopter. The cold wind whipped through the open door as the chopper ascended, heading for a remote base near the volcano. Below them, the earth seemed to tremble, sending plumes of ash and smoke into the sky. Rachel stared out the window, her jaw clenched. The volcano was alive, angry and unpredictable. As they neared the base, the eruption grew fiercer. Lava shot into the sky, and the distant rumble of the volcano echoed through the mountains. The team's destination was in sight, but they could already tell it would be no easy task. The terrain around the volcano was unstable, with jagged rocks, sudden cracks, and thick, swirling smoke. The eruption wasn't going to wait for them to catch up. The helicopter touched down, and the team quickly disembarked. They were greeted by the sight of the volcanic landscape, dangerous and deadly. Thick ash fell like snow, and the air smelled like sulfur. Rachel's heart raced as she adjusted the straps on her gear. Jax barked, sensing the urgency in the air. "We're cutting it close," Officer Harris muttered as they moved toward the base camp. "How are we supposed to get to them in time?" Rachel's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. The volcano's eruptions were unpredictable, and time was already against them. She could feel it in her gut that this mission wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. Someone had known about the eruption in advance. Why hadn't they warned them? Rachel shook off the thought. Now wasn't the time to dwell on it. The mission came first. "Focus," she said, her voice firm. "We'll figure it out along the way. Right now, we need to get to the scientists." The team began their trek toward the volcano's base. The ground beneath their feet shifted, and every step was a risk. The heat from the lava flows was intense, and the air was thick with toxic gases. Jax led the way, his keen senses picking up on faint clues that would help them navigate the treacherous landscape. As they moved closer to the trapped scientists' location, they encountered their first major obstacle. A wide, fast-moving river of lava blocked their path. The heat was unbearable, and the sound of the molten rock crashing against the rocks was deafening. Rachel quickly assessed the situation. "We need to find a way through now." The team scanned the area, looking for any possible route. It was Officer Harris who spotted a narrow pass between two jagged cliffs, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. "We've got away," Harris called out, relief in his voice. "Move," Rachel ordered, and they hurried toward the pass. Jax led them through, his nose twitching as he detected dangerous gas pockets along the way. They had to move carefully, avoiding the worst of the fumes. But it wasn't easy. Harris began to cough, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The toxic gases were getting to him. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him. He was struggling to keep up. "Harris, stay close," she said, her voice sharp. "We don't have time to stop." But Harris was having trouble. His face was pale, and his movements were sluggish. It was clear that the gases were more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. "We can't go back," Harris wheezed. "We're almost there. Just keep moving." Rachel nodded. They couldn't afford to turn back. The scientists were depending on them. As they pressed forward, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The volcano was becoming more active, and the air around them felt charged with danger. Their radio equipment crackled, cutting them off from the outside world. They were alone in the heart of a volcano with no backup. "Keep it together," Rachel ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're going to make it." But deep down, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing in on her. The volcano's eruptions were growing stronger, and the team was growing more vulnerable by the minute. Something wasn't right. Rachel could feel it in her bones. As they neared the scientists' location, another eruption sent tremors through the ground, and the sound of distant explosions filled the air. The team moved faster, driven by the need to save the scientists, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the volcano wasn't the only thing they had to worry about. When they arrived, the scene was nothing like they expected. The shelter, a fragile tent made of thick tarps, barely stood against the lava that surrounded it. Ash fell in thick clouds, and what remained of the equipment was scattered, destroyed by the eruption. The scientists were in bad shape, most of them unconscious or barely clinging to life. "Get them out of there now," Rachel ordered, her voice urgent but steady as she scanned the area. The team jumped into action, their training kicking in. Jax was already moving from person to person, checking their vitals and barking when he found someone still alive. The team worked quickly to gather the injured scientists, lifting them as gently as possible to avoid causing further harm. But with each passing minute, the air grew hotter, the ground beneath them vibrating more violently. Rachel turned to Sergeant Porter. "You're on point," she instructed, her gaze fixed on the lava flow creeping toward them. "Lead them out through the north path." But before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet rumbled once again. Without warning, a sharp eruption shot forth, sending plumes of ash and gas into the air. The ground cracked wide open, sending a shockwave through the camp. Porter didn't have time to react. A section of the camp collapsed, and in an instant, he was buried under a pile of rocks and debris. The team froze. The eruption continued to roar in the distance, but all Rachel could hear was the deafening silence that followed. "Porter!" Rachel shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She raced toward the wreckage, but the heat was unbearable. Every second counted, and every breath felt like it might be her last. The team scrambled, desperate to locate Porter, but the debris was thick, and the eruption wasn't done. "Stay back," Officer Harris shouted as he tried to move the rubble with his hands. But it was clear that no one was getting through that way. "We have to go," one of the other team members urged. "If we don't move now, we'll be trapped too." But Rachel shook her head. "I'm not leaving him behind." With determination in her eyes, Rachel signaled to Jax. "Find him," she commanded. The dog immediately darted into the wreckage, sniffing through the dust and ash. Rachel took a deep breath, focusing. Time was running out. The eruption shockwaves continued to shake the earth beneath her feet, and the lava flows were steadily advancing. It wasn't just the volcano she had to worry about anymore. There was no guarantee the team could even make it out if they didn't act now. But then, Jax barked. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The dog had found Porter. Without hesitation, Rachel and the rest of the team moved forward, using every ounce of strength to shift the debris. They managed to uncover Porter, covered in dust and barely conscious. His chest heaved with strained breaths, but he was alive. "Got him!" Rachel exclaimed. She looked to Harris. "Help me get him to the shelter." The team worked quickly to lift Porter, but the eruption was worsening. Lava flows were beginning to cut off their only escape route. They had to move fast. As the team struggled to carry Porter to safety, one of the scientists, Dr. Victoria Brooks, approached Rachel. She looked pale and shaken, but her eyes held a look of urgency. "Sergeant," she said in a strained voice, "there's something I need to tell you." Rachel stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at Dr. Brooks. "What is it?" The scientist looked around nervously, then lowered her voice. "The eruption. It wasn't an accident. It's connected to something much bigger, something we've been working on. The eruption was planned to cover up our research." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" But before Dr. Brooks could respond further, another explosion rattled the ground. The sky above them seemed to tear open with the force of the eruption. The volcano was growing more volatile with every passing minute. The team barely had time to react before the air was filled with heat, ash, and debris. "We need to get out of here now," Harris shouted, his voice strained as he struggled to move Porter. The urgency in his tone was enough to make Rachel's pulse race. "Move!" Rachel barked, and the team shifted into action, struggling to keep up with the fast-moving lava and falling ash. The terrain was more treacherous than ever, and the smoke was thick, making it nearly impossible to see. They moved as quickly as they could, but the volcanic eruptions were relentless. The team's radios were now useless, cut off from any outside communication. They were on their own, with no way of knowing if help was coming. As they navigated the rough terrain, Rachel couldn't help but feel the weight of Dr. Brooks's words. If what the scientist said was true, then this wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a cover-up. The eruption had been staged to destroy something important, but what? And who was behind it? The team reached a narrow path, barely wide enough to move through. As they pushed forward, Jack suddenly stopped and growled low in his throat. Rachel followed the dog's gaze and saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. A massive fissure had appeared in the ground, and deep inside it, something glinted in the faint light of the eruption. Rachel's pulse quickened. "What is that?" she murmured. As they ventured closer, they realized what it was. Evidence of an underground facility. The walls were lined with strange markings, and the entrance was barely visible beneath layers of rock and debris. This discovery raised even more questions, but Rachel knew one thing for sure. The mission had just taken a turn for the worse. They weren't just fighting the volcano anymore. They were fighting to uncover a secret that someone was willing to kill for. The underground facility they had stumbled upon was no mere laboratory. It was a secret government research center, hidden deep within the bowels of the volcano. Rachel's heart sank as she pieced the situation together in her mind. The eruption, the trapped scientists, everything, it wasn't an accident. Rachel and Jax moved deeper into the facility, the air growing thick with dust and heat as the volcano continued its violent outbursts. They navigated through dimly lit corridors, and their footsteps echoed off the cold stone walls. The flickering lights overhead barely illuminated the space, casting strange shadows across the room. The hum of distant machinery vibrated in the floor, as if the whole place was alive, pulsing with activity. "Look at this," Harris said, pointing to a large wall of monitors. Most of them were cracked and malfunctioning, but some displayed fragments of data that made Rachel's stomach churn. Graphs, images, and diagrams, each one linked to volcanic eruptions, their power harnessed, weaponized. Her mind raced. The project the scientists had been working on wasn't about research. It was about creating disasters, volcanic eruptions used as weapons, and creating devastation on a scale never before imagined. This wasn't just about studying volcanoes, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. This was a government operation to weaponize natural disasters. Jax growled low in his throat, as if agreeing with her. The dog's sharp senses had picked up on the same ominous energy that Rachel was feeling. Rachel stepped closer to the monitors, studying the data. The eruption wasn't random, it was deliberate. They had been sent in to clean up the mess, to cover up a disastrous secret. The eruption had been set in motion to eliminate the evidence. The scientists had been silenced because they were close to exposing the truth. "We need to find the others," Rachel said, her voice hardening. "The team must know about this. They have to see it before it's too late." Just then, the earth shook beneath them, a violent quake rattling the facility. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling, and the ground cracked open, sending a deep tremor through the walls. The entire structure was coming down. "We're not safe here," Harris shouted, trying to keep his balance. "We need to leave now." The team scrambled for the exit, but the collapse of the facility made it clear they wouldn't be able to escape so easily. The corridors were narrowing, and parts of the walls were starting to cave in. Lava began to pour through cracks in the ground, creeping steadily toward them. The walls were unstable, the air thick with toxic fumes and smoke. They were trapped. "Move, move," Rachel ordered, pushing everyone forward. Her eyes were fixed on the narrow passageway ahead. The heat was unbearable, and every second felt like an eternity. The team was already running low on supplies, and they had no way of knowing if the eruption would end or if it would continue to ravage the area. Just as they neared the exit, another eruption rocked the mountain, sending a powerful wave of shock through the facility. The entire tunnel started to collapse, and the path they had taken was quickly blocked by falling debris. Rachel's mind raced. They had to move fast. There was no time to waste. She glanced back to see the team struggling, and Harris was almost too weak to keep moving. The situation was dire, and Rachel knew they couldn't afford to stop. "Push through," she urged. "We can't let the volcano get the best of us now." Finally, they reached the surface, but what they saw stopped them in their tracks. Standing against the backdrop of smoke and fire was Major Nathan Cole, a high-ranking government official, his gun drawn and aimed directly at them. The man had been a shadow in the background during the mission, but now, in the aftermath of the eruption, his true role was clear. "You shouldn't have come here," Major Cole said, his voice cold and flat. "Now, you'll all pay the price for uncovering something you were never meant to know." Rachel's instincts kicked in. She moved to shield the team, her mind racing. This man wasn't just an official, he was the one behind it all. He had orchestrated the eruption to protect the government's dangerous secret. "I don't want to fight you," Rachel said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We know what you did. This is over." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to make that call. This is bigger than you. Bigger than any of you." Without warning, he pulled the trigger. The bullet whizzed past Rachel's shoulder, grazing her arm. Jax leapt into action, charging toward Cole, but the man was ready. He grabbed his weapon, aiming at the dog. In that moment, Rachel acted. She lunged forward, tackling Cole to the ground. The gun clattered away from his hand, but before she could restrain him, another eruption rocked the ground beneath them. Lava surged forward, and a wave of heat swept through the area. "Run!" Rachel shouted. The team had to escape, or they'd be consumed by the volcano. They ran as fast as they could, with Jax leading the way and Cole trailing behind, now incapacitated. The ground shook with each step they took, and the sky above them was filled with the deadly glow of molten lava. They had to make it out before the volcano swallowed everything. The final eruption came with a deafening roar. The ground cracked open, and the team barely escaped the surge of lava that followed. As they climbed up a steep ridge, the team looked back at the volcano, which had erupted in a final, catastrophic explosion. It was clear the volcano wasn't just a disaster. It had been the final act of a government cover-up. As they reached a safe distance, Rachel looked at the evidence they had collected. The mission was over, but the real fight was just beginning. "We've got what we need," Rachel said. "Now, we expose the truth." But as they made their way to safety, a strange message flashed on her communicator, a warning of even darker forces at play. The disaster they had just survived was only part of a much larger plan. Rachel and Jax shared a determined look. The fight was